Okay, I think, well, we have Councillor Olkey who needs to be muted. No? Okay, sorry. No. Everybody, no, still got a bit of an echo. So is anybody, if anybody has their volume turned up, you want to turn your volume down on your computer, just so that it won't get the reverberation. We've got microphones off on all the, yeah, no, you're good. I think maybe. Anyways, it's better now. It's whatever's happened. Okay. Okay. So it's 6:31 and we'll call this meeting to order. Any declaration of interest or general nature thereof, please declare it now. And no conflicts. Okay, so we'll move forward with delegations and presentations. This evening we have StrategyCorp who are joining us, and Mr. Matheson has just joined us here online. And our hope is that the robust conversations that they've had with both council and with the local individuals who've offered insight will provide us with a great plan moving forward. So we're hoping to have the presentation take about a half an hour and then a half an hour for questions if need be, if that's possible. Mr. Matheson, just keep it as straightforward as possible, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty after the fact. Thank you. Okay, I think we've got that sorted. So go ahead, John.
Thank you, very much, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I think you put it extraordinarily well. They were robust conversations. And so the purpose is to really to try and achieve several things tonight. The first is provide you with a quick update on the process, remind you of some of your conclusions from when we last met at the last council workshop, take you through what you concluded were your preferred pillars and initiatives, and then talk about how staff elaborated on the results of your council workshop with a further diving into the details of how to implement and measure on those things. Then, of course, we need to come back to the question of vision, mission, and values, and then talk about next steps. So that's what I'll try and cover. The first thing to discuss is just the process. And there were a lot of different sources for the inputs to the plan. And I think that's the most important thing to have regard to. There was the work that you council did yourselves, but there was also the inputs from staff, which performed a sort of a very useful cross-check function, not so much as to whether your priorities were the important ones, but rather whether there was anything else that they thought needed to be added in order to be, fully compliant with either the things that needed to be addressed or, statutory responsibilities and the like. So there was a kind of a careful cross-checking through senior management and staff. And then there was a process of the community survey that I'm happy to be able to report on. What this yields is, you'll recall that what you did was you came up with what you might call the pillars and the initiatives. So these were suggested by council. And then there were actions, and it's pillars, initiative, actions. There's no magic to those terms. We can certainly rename those if you like, but the big four are your pillars, and then under each you have typically have 3 to 5 initiatives. And then staff recommended a number of different actions that can give effect to your initiatives. And that's so important because it makes sure that what you're talking about is grounded in the reality of what staff is capable of delivering, either because they have the right resources or the right authorities or the right assets to be able to mobilize. And then, of course, every plan is more valuable if it has performance metrics. And so they've recommended performance metrics that can facilitate an ongoing campaign of measurement and reporting on your initiatives and actions, and ultimately the success of the pillars. You'll also recall that last time you concluded that it was right to be thinking on a 10-year horizon, recognizing that that goes beyond this term of council, but any of the really strategic things that are of importance to you are unlikely to be dealt with in the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. And so we have the longer term horizon that's quite appropriate, reflecting the strategic nature of the plan. And it's also important to recall, or for anyone who might be watching who wasn't at the original process, that suggestions were meant to consider both the needs of the civic administration relating to your municipality, but also the broader things that the community needs, and to consider all aspects of government delivery. So, we always know we're a government when we're investing or delivering or regulating, but it's equally important to remember that there's things that only you can do, like convening all the relevant stakeholders to a conversation, or leading or advocating to the federal or the provincial government on behalf of the municipality. So you'll find that the plan covers things that use each of these 5 verbs, and it's not limited to a wish list of spending, but in some cases it has other tools that are equally relevant. The other thing I'd just point out is the worst thing you can do with something like this is go to all the trouble of creating a plan and then put it on a shelf and neatly ignore it for the next few years. And so, working with the administration, there's a very strong plan to link the pillars and the initiatives and the actions to ongoing annual budgets and reporting on operating plans, and to have performance metrics that are authentic to your organization. And I say that because it's actually quite expensive developing performance metrics. And so where you want to start is with stuff that you're already good at measuring, and then you want to add in new measurements as required, but you don't want to just start willy-nilly. Like, it's possible to measure too many things. A dashboard with too many dials on it is not relevant to the governance of the organization. But you'd expect that staff would have lots of metrics that they would keep tabs on that they wouldn't necessarily report to you on a regular basis, because they'd be below the level that would be required for you to fulfill the council's function. But the idea is we've got metrics that can make sure that they can come into the annual progress reports so that you have a sense of how much progress you're making. And that way you get to adjust and tweak over time. And that's where the ultimate correction in the plan is. If you feel like you're not moving fast enough, then you need to either think about how to adjust your annual budgets or your annual operating plans. So that kind of catches us up to where we were at the end of the last session, where you had basically identified 4 pillars, as you see: delivering effective and accountable government, promoting quality of life and environmental stewardship, growing a livable community with great services, and fostering sustainable economic development. And we'll go over each one of these in a minute, so I won't read each of these at you at the moment, but you can see that these were the priorities that you identified. And as you recall, that reflected both your original thinking about things that were of importance to you, as well as some things that evolved or built from the previous strategic plan. But this plan was very much an evolution, like a sea change from the previous plan. It wasn't sort of like the old one, dusted off or corrected by 1 or 2 points. It was a more robust reflection of this council's priorities. So, and here I'll call upon the CAO at any time to jump in. So what happened was this work was then shared with administration, and administration's task was to consider, and so you see for this one, this is the first pillar, and it spreads on 2 pages because there were a lot of specific suggestions about delivering effective and accountable government. And as you can see, the 5 principal, or the 5 initiatives down the side here correspond with the initiatives down the side of the page in the left-hand column. And then what staff has added is a series of actions and metrics, which are designed to give effect to the bumper sticker of continuous improvement, or the bumper sticker of commit to the AMP and prudent funding. And again, it's probably not sensible for me to read all of these at you, because that would probably be quite taxing both of time and of your patience. But what I can do is maybe just provide you with a quick summary. The continuous improvement one, you can see a lot of focus here on the corporate review and updating HR policies and making certain that the policies are up to date and reflective of current best practices, standardizing and implementing programs and policies and processes to improve organizational effectiveness and efficiency, and undertaking an overall corporate risk management strategy. And you can see the metrics that would be tracking along here that would allow you to have a sense that they were proceeding. With respect to committing to the asset management plan and prudent funding, you can see that there is an overall commitment to both taking measures around work order and management system centralization and streamlining and automating processes, and reviewing financial policies and regular reporting on financial health, just a whole series of activities designed to bring effect to that. Now, ultimately, it's going to be in council's hands every year to make the decisions about how much funding goes in the top end of the asset management plan. But these are activities about making certain that you've got the wherewithal to follow through on them. And again, you see some of the metrics are reporting on budgets that are developed to support the AMP and defined service levels. Jumping on to advocating for the community, fostering relationships with all levels of government, and making certain that there's the appropriate lobbying going on. Investing in a communication strategy and capacity. That was both the recognition that there needed to be both the strategy and the capacity to implement it. And so you can see some activities there associated with improving the overall visibility and effectiveness of communications, and some appropriate measurements associated with the success of that. And then enhancing the customer experience, develop an engagement strategy, customer service standards, and the appropriate staff training to make certain that it's implemented. So perhaps Madam Mayor, perhaps I should just pause there briefly to see, rather than moving on, because it's a bit of a laundry list, to see if anybody had any questions about that.
Thank you. Is there any questions at this point for Mr. Matheson or the CAO in regards to the plan so far? And I have nobody putting their hand up. So go ahead, Mr. Matheson, you can continue on.
Thanks. So the second broad pillar relates to promoting quality of life and environmental stewardship. And as you can see, there are 4 main initiatives here. The first relates to addressing solid waste management issues. And we have established and fostered the waste management working group, and aligning on the new blue box regulations, and programming for waste diversion, and addressing the WDS closure. With maintaining and improving water quality, supporting source water protection, supporting external and creating internal education and awareness programs, focusing on the healthy shoreline, clean and green boating, supporting responsible water and wastewater management, and effective stormwater management systems. The third related to promoting natural landscapes through community and agency partnerships, supporting and proposing initiatives within the township with Parks Canada, the Frontenac Arch Biosphere, the St. Lawrence Parks Commission, and Ontario Parks, and promoting the use of your outdoor environment, such as trails and lookouts and waterways. And then the other was, of course, on everybody's mind these days, mitigating climate change impacts, promoting shoreline stewardship, supporting waste diversion, developing a climate change strategy, including environmental considerations in policy development across the board and protecting wetland areas. So, Madam Mayor, again, perhaps I can pause there in case there's any questions.
Are there any questions in regards to these actions under this pillar? Again, I think, oh, Councillor Oki, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I would think that CRCA has more than a little bit to say about promote natural landscapes through community agency partnerships. Simply because you look after watersheds, and that relates very much to wetlands.
So perhaps your comment is to add the CRCA to that list of people.
Please.
Okay, that's an easy add, I think, and reasonable.
I'm sorry, I just
Cataraqui Region
Cataraqui.
Conservation Authority, so CRCA for short. We'll know what it is.
Got it. Thank you. Anything else on that one?
No other hands? Please proceed.
The next heading was growing a livable community with great services. So this one addresses community safety and well-being, adopting your regional community safety and well-being plan, supporting fire services activities around prevention and recruitment and retention and recognition, strengthening relationships with the library and other program providers, and enhancing access to public facilities was the sort of first broad heading. Promoting new residential growth, developing and updating effective development processes to sort of facilitate and expedite development projects, advocating for infrastructure improvements to support new development, and developing a new in-migration strategy to make sure that you have the sort of appropriate population growth. Exploring opportunities for affordable housing. This is an amazingly important priority pretty well everywhere I go these days. Documenting and standardizing processes to assist developers so that they can understand what the process is and hopefully be able to access such support as may be out there from senior levels of government. Creating guidelines for consistent development standards and pursuing development of township-owned properties for residential developments. Preserving and promoting heritage and culture, working with the Heritage Committee to advance the heritage initiatives, maintaining a partnership with the archives and recognizing local Indigenous culture, and then focus on improving trails and lookouts and waterfront access. This was seen both as being like a remedial thing, but also as an investment thing. Developing and implementing a sustainable parks maintenance program, investing in in park infrastructure in a manner consistent with the AMP, and working with external agencies to improve and enhance access and maintenance to green spaces and trails and such. So, Madam Mayor, that's the next one, and there's one more.
I have a question from Councillor Oki again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, preserve and promote heritage and culture. I think we need to emphasize again the partnership with our library. And this means a great deal, especially in the smaller villages, Lyndhurst and Sealy's Bay. And we might also talk about some of the concerts and things that go on. I'm thinking specifically in Sealy's Bay.
Perhaps then when you're looking at the fourth under action, the fourth bullet there, or sorry, the second bullet, maintain partnership with archives. It should be with library and archives.
Okay.
I think it shows that with the short form, the Lansdowne So maybe just put library and archives,
Okay,
and then the short form is there.
Sorry, Worship, the further point was the support to various festivals and things that go on that do draw people and enhance life for people here.
Okay.
We could say Frost Fest, we could say Turkey Fair, things like that.
Lansdowne Agricultural Society and that sort of thing.
But generally, just the cultural things we have going on that we support. There's all things that Lansdowne too with the horse fair
So
and things.
local events, that sort of thing.
Yes, please.
Okay, so add a bullet to that particular action that we support local events and initiatives to bring the community together. And then the examples were Frost Fest, Turkey Fair, Lansdowne Agricultural Fair. And Rockport used to have something as well. So there's lots of examples we could put in there, but I think the main initiative is for us to support them and not necessarily fund them, but to provide facilities, provide, that sort of thing.
perfect.
Any other comments in regards to this particular pillar? Seeing none, we'll go forward from there.
Great. So the last one is fostering sustainable economic development, and there are three main planks here. The first is promoting economic development by way of attracting and expansion and retention. And so the typical activities of ECDEV here are set out. There's another that specifically focuses on new tourism investment and the development of a strategy to support tourism and sports tourism in particular, exploring new technologies to promote and support tourism-based businesses, and exploring opportunities to extend the tourist season out into the shoulders beyond just the high summer. And then finally, and I know this one's been important and difficult of late, accelerate investment in broadband. It sets out various activities there. Those are the main activities under fostering sustainable economic development.
Councillor Olkey, yet again.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I do appreciate that long-suffering smile. I don't want people to take my remarks the wrong way, because these are very important things. But it's almost like this is a recovery after COVID. The tourist trade fell right away, and we want obviously to get it back and to improve it. Now, when we did the first round of this, I was somewhat frustrated by myself because I didn't have definitions handy. But I do believe we need some kind of industrial strategy for economic development. And where I was challenged was I did not have a definition handy for light industry. I'll correct that now. Light industry is production for consumption. A dairy farm technically is light industry. The industry that provides machinery to that dairy farm is heavy industry. And roughly that paradigm could follow. But I do look at other communities similar in size to ours that do have an industrial strategy and come up with things like industrial parks. There's one in Loyalist Township, and many of you have seen it. I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibility. It isn't possible overnight. And our last line here does in fact have a lot of impact on it. So all these new businesses would want access to broadband, as do many of our existing businesses. But I think we could have some kind of thrust line towards developing some kind of industrial strategy, because elsewhere we talked about providing sustainable jobs, and we have to live in a modern economy going forward. So I just like to leave that out for comment and throw the brickbats, if you will, but that's what I think. Thank you.
Okay, so I think John was taking notes in behind. I can sort of see the yellow in behind. So does anybody have any additional comments in regards to a light industry production, adding that to economic development? Okay. Oh, Councillor Grell, go ahead.
in support of Councillor Olkey's proposition, perhaps the concept of a light industrial park, when we talked about the development south of Lansdowne, the west side of the road was going to have some of that attached to it. Perhaps we need to start thinking of in the Gananoque region, because we put in, for instance, P38, a propane is in there. Maybe we should be thinking that region to build out on 32 in some kind of light industrial park. And I use that term very loosely. I'm not that familiar with a definition, but, you know, and when I say light industry, it could be fabricating, but they're going to need broadband, which is very accessible out of Gananoque, extremely accessible as opposed to the center of our township. And maybe that's something that should be pursued and not necessarily at the expense of Lansdowne, but that was going to take the whole housing and everything in there. But maybe right outside of Gananoque in our property, or our township properties up 32. Perhaps that is something, and if that requires acquiring land, then so be it. I don't know, or we work in partnership with people who own land. But it strikes me that in our township, that would be a decent place to be thinking about that concept. Thank you.
Okay, any further comment in regard to this? Okay, I think the notes are made on that. So I don't know, John, are you looking for us to give you the guidance to add it, or?
You know what, if it's broadly consistent with where council wants to go, I'm certain I can work with the CAO to come up with something that captures the spirit of a light industrial strategy, potentially focused on the feasibility of a light industrial park. And if you like, I can capture the idea of, potentially proximate to Gananoque on your, is it Highway 32 or County Road 32?
I guess the only concern that I have when we're getting down into the weeds with specifics of where it might be located and stuff, then it sort of goes a bit further than what the overreaching plan. So understanding that maybe a light industrial strategy can be interwoven into our economic development overall strategy is definitely plausible and potentially realistic, depending on the players and what potential sites might exist. But the other thing is that we have economic development group committee that are meeting on a regular basis, and a number of these initiatives were directly from them and what they thought they could accomplish. So I don't want to put a kibosh on a light industrial arm, if you will, as part of that strategy, but that we certainly would never discourage that, I doubt, as long as it was in the proper area, proper zoning, met proper setbacks, all that sort of thing. But just to keep in mind, the official plan for our municipality severely limits that type of growth. Anything is it south of the 401? I think south of the 401 limits what you can so north of the 401 is fine. But because of the corridor where we are, that might be some of the places that people might automatically think that growth could happen very easily. So I'll recognize Councillor Jameson, who's got his hand up. Go ahead.
To your point, Your Worship, about potentially getting in the weeds at this point. All of these things, particularly the ones that come from staff, a lot of them are in there because they have to be in there. The legislative requirements of the municipality going forward. In terms of light industry or tourism and so on, that becomes the study once we approve a vision, if such a thing is possible, a mission and a vision. So I'm very impressed with what is really a laundry list potential things we could do. But what I have challenged with, and I know we're going to discuss missions, I'm challenged with I'm challenged by the challenge of not understanding that we have a very tight framework within which we must work. We're a legislated entity. We only exist under the Municipal Act, and we are slaves to the Planning Act and whatever other acts that the province in particular decides to dump on us with no money to support any of the things that we want to do. So I hope we will recognize that we're not the community. And I've shared this with Director Goodman, and I'm sure she's cringing. We're the government that is here to support the community. And our strategic plan is a plan for a government, not for the community. We support community activity, legislated and aspirational, but we're not the community. So my concern as an overarching, notwithstanding all the really good things that are in here, is that we stray right outside the box. And instead of understanding it should be our strategic planning is a framework within which we have to function under a very strict legislative approach. So all the things we've attempted to do, like get a broadband system and have the money just yanked out from under us, is kind of our lot because of the nature of a legislative environment. So as we move towards providing something that's clear and concise and comprehensive and well communicated to our citizens, I hope we understand, and I reserve the right to be wrong always, that we're dealing with something that we have a very limited capacity to deliver, and we should work really hard within that limited capacity to maximize what we can do, rather than, and this is my criticism of the last strategic plan, put spas in, Nordic spas in Sealy's Bay, and goodness knows what was going on that never happened. I'd like to see us do a framework that deals with the doable, deals with the nuts and bolts, deals with the hammer and nails. And I think light industrial policy is what it will be, but it doesn't necessarily translate immediately into action. So that's my rant. Thank you.
So I'm just looking at under the action bullets that, supports identified economic development committee priorities. So if light industrial was to be a priority, it could be brought through that process. And I take Councillor Jameson's point, as I do Councillor Olkey's, that it's something that we don't want to discourage. But I guess the other part of where I'm looking at this going, just because it's not specifically laid out in this doesn't mean that we're against it. Does that make sense? But I understand that you want to have it laid out so that it could be part of a focus. Is that?
I don't want to see something that would take us into the future ignored or downplayed. If it's referred to as a strategy to be investigated or something like that, that's fine. But I would like it to be somehow in the forefront of people's thoughts as opposed to action at this point.
Okay. So the secondary part of that, just going back to what Councillor Jameson has made a point of, as far as how we execute what these thoughts could be and fund them, because that's the other thing that we have to be very cognizant of, is that these are the things that we might be interested in. We're limited when it comes to economic development. And I know that we've had these philosophical discussions at a number of different events and different committee meetings and different council meetings even. We really have to provide the environment whereby people want to locate here and put these types of businesses here. So should our focus be on a light industrial strategy, or just providing an environment such that a business can come here, function without the red tape, or minimize the red tape, and support that process. I think also going back to the comment made about what we're required to do from a Municipal Act point of view, the economic development piece isn't legislated as one of the things that we have to do. We want to do it because we want to support our business owners, and we want to to provide that assistance. Where we've put our money where our mouth is, and we have a community and business development officer, director, and also supporting the economic development committee priorities. So I guess I'm struggling to put where that might be, and just maybe put another, if we put that in as a part of the strategy, or put it under economic development priorities, that we could ask the committee to investigate that part. Okay, so maybe that's just a note to be put down for the economic development committee as part of this strategy and the priorities that could happen. Okay, perfect. That seems to make Councillor Oakey happy, and I'll recognize Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. To follow up on Councillor Oakey's comments about an industrial park, I think I know the one you're referring to in Bath or Loyal's Township. That started out as just that, an small industrial park, lightweight, if you will. And because my day-to-day job, we do business in that park now. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of the others to do just what you're referring to feel out what prompted them to move there. Excuse me. And they tend to piggyback off the initial movers.
Mm-hmm.
Classic example is our neighbors to the east in Edwardsburg Cardinal, not too many decades back, decided to take a bold step and buy the Port of Johnstown for maybe $1. I don't know what, I don't care about the money, but it was virtually a mothballed port when Edwardsburg Cardinal bought that. And we look down the road now to what they've created, and it snowballed into terrific job opportunities. And with those job opportunities comes reference that they got to live somewhere, all those employees. They could live here, drive down there for that matter. But as far as to switch gears and look at it in a different perspective, to P38, to the elevators just north of Lansdowne, to the Huck Marina project, and there's others going on, individual businesses. If we create the environment, they'll find a place to locate. If we create an industrial park, which I'd be in favor of, but I tend to, sitting on the council's ear on the EDC committee of our own, I know that they're a pretty aggressive group, and they found their direction in this past year or two, and I think they're well versed to move forward and take us with them when they do that, as to where we'll end up. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks. Just a few comments.
Okay, so I think that we have a next step to take it back to EDC and make it not make it, but suggest that it might be part of the overall strategy that they look at, or see if they can bring back a recommendation. It also would require significant discussion with the planning department about what sites may or may not be available that would work with zoning and proximity and what have you. So that duly noted. And I think that leaves us with no more questions. So you can go forward there, John.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Council. That's a lot of work done quite quickly. I'll just pass now into public input from the survey. I should point out that the numbers I'm going to share with you, they're the result of a voluntary participant community survey, not a scientific opinion poll. So the difference is a scientific opinion poll, of course, draws a sample that's statistically representative of your community. This is just a bunch of people who wanted to participate. So you can't be quite so confident that the numbers have like a statistical validity of, like you'll often hear in elections, they'll say it's plus or minus 2 or 3%. There is no particular statistical validity to this. What this is the people who decided to participating. So of the participants, as you can see, there were about 418 who answered this question. So it's typically we're in the 400 to 450 range with each question as to how many people have answered. You can see that this tends to skew slightly longer tenure of residence, about half or so having lived here for 20 years, but there's some representation from people who have come to the community more recently. They come from a variety of settlement areas, but the majority are Lansdowne residents. There was about 40% actually came to to Leeds Thousand Islands to live, work, and raise a family. About 17% are cottagers. So there's a mix of folks who have those sort of different outlooks on the community. In talking to them about what they found most important about the community, and this was one where they could tick as many as they wished, so the numbers add up to greater than 100. The pristine natural environment and the quality of life were the two highest responses for the main reasons why they live in your community. But others were proximity to family and friends, and a strong sense of neighborliness, and the affordable cost of living. And so you recall that when we were talking about the SWOT analysis for community, you find a lot of the things that council and staff identified, or senior management identified through the strengths and weaknesses came through very strongly as being validated by the participants in this survey. That's my reason for sharing it. Second thing, this is sort of an interesting one, and this is kind of typical with what I find in surveys like this around the province. You get about half of respondents sort of strongly agreeing that keeping taxes low is the most important thing. And you get about the other half that probably are thinking more in terms of value for money. They would say, no, I neither agree nor disagree, or I disagree, or I, in a small number, strongly disagree that the lowest, that we recall Canadian Tire used to say the lowest price is the law. I think you get a balance of about 50-50 between the respondents who say keep taxes low and the others who say make them appropriate, because you're not doing me any favors if you cut services too much. And so you got about a half and half balance there. About 58% of respondents think that your local government is on the right track. And when we asked them, well, if you think so, why or why not? If we asked why, they said, like, yes, good governance, lots of listening, environmentally responsible. We're seeing improvements. The township has a strong online presence. So those were some of the answers they gave. If no, some commented on the cost of water or heat or sewer, the need for better recreation, the need for more young families, bylaw building code not equally enforced on the islands versus the mainland, some neglected roads and infrastructure. I've never seen a community survey that didn't say that. Seasonal residents don't feel that they receive the appropriate services for their taxes. I've also never seen a survey that had a seasonal component that didn't say that. And then you get into folks who sort of start drifting away from municipal issues about needing better schools, need better economic development. The reason this is interesting, you'll see that we've got more numeric answers in a minute, but this is just interesting because when we kind of gave people, if you will, a free kick, and they could say whatever it was that made them think that you were either on the right track or the wrong track, these were the sorts of things that they identified. And you would recall from your own SWOT analysis that we discussed last time, there isn't any big thing that was coming up repeatedly that you're not on top of. That's the main purpose of this question. It's like, is there anything that we're talking about that they're not talking about at all? Or is there anything that they're talking about that we're completely swinging and missing at? Just not on the same page. And I think the interesting cross-check about this, and we just put some representative ones here. There's several hundred in an eye chart of an Excel spreadsheet. But the quick answer I can tell you is no, we weren't hearing a lot of issues that aren't covered in this plan that you've identified. So this next slide, the purpose of this of this question was to see how they felt your broad 4 proposed pillars were. And so you can see the question was, what do you see as the top priorities for the government of Leeds and the Thousand Islands for the next 10 years? And so we actually took your language from your pillars to see whether they liked it. And you can see 66% like the delivering effective and accountable government. Promoting quality of life and environmental stewardship was 61. Growing a livable community with great services was 69, and fostering sustainable economic development was 56. Some of the other things with which they were able to specify freeform if they didn't agree, inclusion and equality came up some, the need for better transportation infrastructure, high-speed internet came up, waste and refuse improvements, eliminating bylaw loopholes. There were some people you could almost tell they gave that answer every time. There's some people who are very exercised about bylaws because they gave every time they had a chance to give a free form one, they would mention that. And then like a very thoughtful one, balancing the needs of full-time and seasonal residents. But bottom line of this question is the public broadly supports the 4 pillars. And what I can tell you is there's nothing else that tested so well that it might have made you think, whoops, we totally missed the 5th pillar that we should have had. You were kind of on good solid ground in terms of being on the right track. So then what we did was we didn't do them all in one question. This data is pulled from different questions where we got at some of the different things that were either the specific actions or the specific initiatives. And you can see they all test pretty well. Continuous improvement. I should hope that we would have not done well if we said we were going to discontinue continuous improvement. So this is hardly a surprise that 82% of people want you to keep getting better. Committing to AMP and prudent funding. We didn't actually ask them about the AMP because we knew that they would have said, what's an AMP? But what we did was we asked what their thoughts were about prudent fiscal management, and that came back, not surprisingly, 85% positive. So that's obviously on the right track. Advocating for the community. There was relatively strong numbers about that. Investing in communication strategies and capacities tested well, and enhancing customer service did. So again, not surprising. I should say a lot of these things, it's unlikely that people would be opposed to them. But that's a good thing because they're in your plan and you certainly wouldn't want people to be opposed by them. What we were really looking for was either things that they liked more that weren't in your plan that you somehow missed, or things that that didn't cling well with them. So addressing solid waste management issues, around 85% or so. Maintaining and improving water quality was in the 50s. Only 22% of respondents agree that their neighborhood has inadequate water and wastewater systems, and 48% neither agreed nor disagreed, but those were all focused in one part of the municipality, obviously. Promoting natural landscapes through community agencies and partnerships, about 57% were in favor of that. Mitigating climate change impacts, about 54%. So again, all pretty positive. Growing a livable community with great services. 57% agree that they'd like to see council work to improve access to public facilities. 51% agree that they need better access to healthcare. The interesting thing about numbers that are sort of in the 50s, these are agree strongly, disagree. In many cases, the no opinion would then be like another 20% or 25%. And the people who were sort of hard opposed would be down in the low numbers. You can see preserving and promoting heritage and culture is relatively popular. Improving trails and access to the waterfront were both the 84% agreeing or strongly agreeing they'd like to see improved maintenance of parks. So that one came up strong. Whatever insights you were having about people being dissatisfied with that was obviously strongly validated by the research. 56% see promoting local economic development, tourism as the top priority over the next 10 years. The interesting thing here is the accelerating the investment in broadband was quite popular. Tourism was a little bit lower, but it's also interesting that when you express promoting economic development in terms of generating jobs, you do slightly better than 50%. When you express it as better services for businesses and business owners, it's in the 40s. So it's just interesting. You're able to make the numbers move by about 10%, depending on whether you focus on the beneficiaries of the economic activity or on the business owners. So you just want to be a little bit careful about that. But you know, there's plenty of rules against bonusing that keep that from running off the rails and going too far in that direction anyway. So the bottom line from the community survey was we were testing on the things that were in your plan, and the things that are in your plan for the most part test at least at the vast majority of them test in the 50s and the 60s. And as you saw, there were several that get up into the 70s and 80s. So it was a fairly positive set of results. But I think more importantly, as a cross-check, there was really nothing that came up as being, oh, there's an idea that was generated that you guys missed, you guys collectively being council and or staff. There wasn't really anything that anybody could name or put a finger on that you hadn't covered somewhere. So that was kind of how we used the survey data. So happy to take any questions on it. I can answer any questions that are answerable.
Sorry, I'll take a question from Councillor Olkey and then Councillor Fody, and just to keep in mindful of the time we're at 20 after 7, so we do have a big agenda tonight. So if you can be brief, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'm going to admit I have some training and experience with what we used to call operational research, and we have a small sample in an uncontrolled survey here. Based on your experience, John, you have strong confidence that this provides a pretty good snapshot of the overview of the township. That is a question. It wasn't phrased that way, but it is a question.
Yeah, look, I would have loved it if we'd had a few hundred more respondents, but I think we provided them with enough open-ended questions that there was lots of opportunity for people to say, no, I don't agree with this at all. You're forcing me in. Like, what we didn't do was force them into validating your things because there were no other choices. So given all the limitations of it being a voluntary survey as opposed to a statistically drawn sample, I think you're in pretty good shape, just because if you ask 450 or so people, is there anything else on your mind that's not covered here? We really didn't get anything that you hadn't covered. So I think that's about as far as I go with it. Your list of topics is very consistent with theirs, and they're not coming up with anything that says you completely missed this. I wouldn't say that, you're 58% on the right track is something that you could go to the bank on. But, but I'd certainly be nervous if it had only been 22% said you were on the right track. Like, this is certainly better than not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, John, if you want to go back to your slide numerically, I believe it was 15, the first bar graph you had with the length of time residents had lived here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find my cursor. There it is. Got it.
That's the one. When I read through this, I was encouraged on that very first 0 to 5 years. People have lived here 5 years or less, because to me, it answered a lot of questions. From people that tend to be negative, that our taxes are high, which we know they're not in comparison. And, when 20% of the respondents have lived here 5 years or less, I would highly think that if you're going to move to a municipality, that'd be one check mark you'd want to look into. But that bar graph there of the number of people having moved to this area in recent years, even if you took the 10 years and under, it checks off a lot of boxes for me in a comfort zone, that they see the area as being safe. It's affordable. It's an area where obviously they want to live in a comfort zone, be it the lakes and rivers or what have you. But that bar, when I read that graph, I should say, to me, it spoke a lot louder than what it actually reads. And of course it carried on through in the rest of your questions. But I must say, well, I've got the floor here with John. I very much liked your profile, the way you've handled all these questions and how they kind of intertwined backdoor, as you alluded to here a minute ago, and you kind of flushed everybody out to say what they had to say in one way or another. And it was well done. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is a good point, Councillor Fody, that if you look at the responses, 50% were 50% of people who responded were long-term residents, 20 years or more, and 50% were less than 20 years, which I think is a good cross-section of people who might have been born and raised here and people who might have been transplants or recent arrivals. So that's a good point to underscore. So not to push you too far along there, John, but I know we have more slides to get through. So if we could keep moving, that would be great.
We're almost done, Madam Mayor. So where you now have is, so you had your priorities staff pretty much validated them and said, this is how we can make them real and how we can measure them and make sure that you've got operating plans that are linked to your strategic plan. There's certainly no reason from the survey to think that you're on the wrong track, and probably lots of reason to think you're on the right track. So that would kind of bring to an end the content portion of the main pillars and the various activities. So that leads us back to the thing that's necessary to complete the strategic plan, which is the vision, mission, and values. And you know, I think the best way to think of the vision is it's where you're heading, and the best way to think about your mission is what you do every day. And the values are the things that express your relationship to you know, to the way. It's almost like the promises that you offer to the people who you work with and the people who you serve, both in the sense of serving them as if you will, customers, or as citizens, depending on whether they're consuming a service or whether you're doing a service for them, or you know, what all the dignity that you'd expect your employees to have and such. So those are the three tasks. And what I've tried to do is collate all the various inputs that I have to try and give you something to work with. The vision, what some of the clear themes that came through from the various interviews, and also from, like, frankly, I spent a lot of time immersing myself in all the different inputs. And what it came up with were these ideas that you were sort of interested in growth, that you were open for business, but there was quite a sort of future ready or future oriented aspect to it. You know, I must say, you don't come across listening to you as a bunch of people who are trying to prevent change. You come across people that are trying to make sure that you got the right kind of change coming in the right way. And there was also a fairly progressive streak that was coming through. And so I think what's significant here, compared certainly to your previous vision, which put a greater focus on the preservation of the past. I just put this together for your consideration, that the township will be a future-oriented and progressive committee surrounded in natural beauty, true to its small town roots, but where people, the economy, and nature can flourish together. And I can't imagine anything much more agonizing at this time of day than like a detailed group edit of words that are vague like this. And so I'm certainly in your hands, Madam Mayor. I think we gave the offer last time to have council to sort of suggest any written comments they might like to make by way of wordsmithing, and I'm certainly the guy to try and hammer them out further. But I'd love some general direction as to whether you think this is in the right direction. It would be bookended by a mission. You see, if this is talking about where you're going to be, future-oriented, progressive, and in effect, flourishing and growing, the mission is basically a kind of a nuts and bolts one, that you operate, maintain, and grow Thousand Islands, or leads Thousand Islands, its services and assets with a focus on sustainability, improvement, and customer service. So that one is fairly nuts and bolts, and speaks to what you do every day. And that reflected, again, some of the key ideas that came from the interviews around, you know, focus on prudence and operational maintenance and delivery of services and sustaining and improving. So you'd have a mission that was kind of about what you do every day, and you'd have a vision about where you were heading. But I'm the first one to admit that trying to distill something as complicated as your community into one sentence is a bit of a heroic thing. So that might be something that you may want to consider a little more. I think we did circulate these slides, or slides very similar, that had the old mission and vision after the last session. And to the degree that I got any responses, I've incorporated those here. But that could be another appropriate way to go if you want to avoid getting into lengthy debate about the words here.
So based on the proposed mission and vision statement, was there any glaring things that were missing or that you felt were not represented? I think they're fairly succinct myself, but obviously we're looking for feedback. Go ahead, Councillor Wilkie.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I find the proposed mission just a trifle vague by the word improvement standing alone. Are we just improving what we have, an enhanced status quo? Or does improvement mean, in some sense, futuristic development? Somehow I'd like to link those ideas, see them linked. We see the development in East Kingston. We see the development in Smiths Falls and to the east of us. Those will exert pressures on us eventually. So something about leaning into the future, however you choose to word it, John. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further comment in regards to the proposed mission and vision? Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I have 2 pages of notes and a bunch of posted notes and all the slides. So where do you want me to start, Your Worship?
Oh, dear God.
Just the overarching challenge for me is, and again, I've shared these notes with Director Goodman. My concern is that we need to stay inside our own lane. And we are a government. We are not the community. And when you start to distill it down to various proposed missions and so on, it starts to look like we're everybody. We can't get 500 people to fill in a survey to talk to us about what the heck we're doing. That's you can say, well, statistically, that happens all over the province. And it does, because I did a little bit of, no nonsense Google research, and they don't do any better than we do. So that's fine. But what I'm concerned about is what we're trying to do is build a strategic plan, in my humble opinion, that allows us to direct our staff to fulfill a mandate that we think will satisfy our constituents. There are only 7 of us that are actually representing the community in this room. We are collectively a government, and everything we need to think about has to be in that context. So we provide foundation. We don't pick losers and winners. That's not our job as a government. When I look at the pillars, the only one that doesn't work for me is the economic development pillar, because it's wishy-washy. It's like, it's something you throw everything into that you really think you would like to do, but then you don't put any money in it because they say, keep the taxes low. That's your driving force in the township. And that's what I will hear, and we will all hear if any of us that run for re-election, that's the number one thing we're going to hear. So when we throw everything in economic development, that we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, we know we're not going to finance it because we can't. And if we can't finance it, let's not promise it. I wouldn't even have an economic development pillar. So I'll end by saying I would go with the 3 pillars that are there, because they talk about getting management to do what they do best. Make sure that the accountability in government is solid and good, that we're taking care of the roads and the bridges and the ditches, that we're making sure our parks are nice, and that we're providing a level of service that our business community can live with, community building. And if you did all those things, that's economic development from within the structure that we are actually legally mandated to do. So I've left my notes with Ms. Goodman, but the only sort of final point I will make is I don't think we should use the word small town. We're a rural community. We have 5 unincorporated villages that all have a different idea about their place in the world. And they're unincorporated and they have no power, but they're in amongst Charleston Lake Association or the Thousand Islands Association. Those are all communities too. So I would like to see us embrace our rural values, because I think that's really what is reflected in what I see and hear every day in among my neighbors. So that's the only specific quibble I have, except for the big quibble, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just as an aside, this is a delegation as well. We're not making a motion to accept this or finalize this tonight. So this is to provide feedback to help get to that stage. So just so that nobody is under any sort of duress that we got to figure this out right this second. But we do eventually need to. So the comments made by both Councillor Oki and Councillor Jameson have been duly noted. And then Councillor Mabee has something to add. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just like to say that, again, I was pleased by the report and read it thoroughly. I honestly did not write down a lot of things because so many things can change, and it would only take a small little blip in our world to change a lot of this, again, as the pandemic did for us all. But having said that, this council and previous council and staff that have been around, we have an enormous talent sitting at the back of this room right now in the staff that we have here, who can take this initiative and make it as large as we want it and make this community better than it's ever been. And they have the ability and the knowledge to do that. And I am thankful for the group that has been assembled by the council and the staff that have hired and got new blood in their areas also. So my hats are off to the staff that are here that are doing an excellent job in keeping us and moving us forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to actually say something like that myself, but you took my thunder, but that's okay. How many more slides do you have, John, to wrap this up? Just because I know we still have a few more things to get through this evening.
Just one.
Just more. Okay. Well, I'll let you go. I don't have any other hands up here.
So the only other one was the values, which two. The only other thing was the values, and these all came straight out of your interviews. So there shouldn't be anything here that you haven't agreed with, but there's always things that you could add to these. The only challenge with the values is, it could become a bit of a laundry list. So and again, I'd be happy to take any comments on those, offline or whatever, sensing the moment and the need to move ahead. And what I just say, Madam Mayor, is the next steps are, so we'll update to reflect council input from this session, and then we would convert to a near to final form, or, more or less a final form. And the strategic plan process or outcome should probably be a document that has this sort of outline. This is typical that we could depart from this, but some kind of message from the mayor and then the CAO and a background in the process and key findings from the environmental scan and SWOT, and then a vision, mission, and values, and then the pillars, subject to any amendments you may wish to make to them, and then a passage about how this plan will be used, which is kind of the commitment that it's not something that's going to be put on a shelf, but that it'll continue to be integrated into annual operating and budget plans. So that's the next step would be to translate it into something that looks less like a PowerPoint and more like a PDF to sort of desktop published document that would have this document transformed into something that would be more appropriate for being posted up on the website.
Thank you very much. Are there any final comments for John and his group to add to the presentation? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Lackey, and then Councillor Oki.
Through you, Your Worship, to John, I really appreciate the depth of this report. I thought it was very well done. It was all the information I think we need to move forward. I'm glad you were on the job.
Thank you.
Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. At the risk of changing some of our traditions here, with heated agreements and refined disagreements, I'm going to encourage you to keep in the fourth pillar, but I also do agree with Councillor Jameson that we should use rural community as opposed to small town.
That is a fair comment, I believe, and but I think that came out through the discussion. True enough.
Just got to make sure. You never know.
Well, we have our director making copious notes back there as well, so I think she knows us maybe a little bit better than John, but I know that all of us have had a chance to sit with John. But I think the last point that I don't know for certain, but I'm going to go out on a limb, that previous strategic plans, I don't know how involved staff were other than at the senior management level. And I know that this particular process, we endeavored to ensure that we got a number of individuals on staff at all varying levels to be part and parcel of the information that was imparted here. And it's important because right down to the person who works for Aqua that flushes the hydrants, to the person who fills the potholes, to the person who is at the front counter versus the person in management, making sure that everybody's working in lockstep. Without that cohesive orchestration, none of the vision, mission, values, none of it can be to actually be executed. And I know that, you know, some people have been grateful that we've been managing to govern throughout COVID without missing a beat, so to speak. That was partially because people were willing to go to virtual meetings, but with the rural broadband challenge, which I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, that made things even more difficult, but we managed to get through it. But having this plan going forward, and I look forward to seeing more of a final version in the near future, will mean that everything will dovetail back to this. So the work plans that the senior management will have will dovetail back to this. And will all be integrated in how we work. I take Councillor Jameson's point about economic development because I sit on the razor edge of that because I believe in economic development, but I also believe strongly, being a child of the late 90s, early 2000s in Toronto, that you got to cut the red tape to get out of the way of the people to make those businesses, because we don't actually do economic development. We don't do the economic part. That is the private individual who's going to bring the business here, but can't because they can't get answers or can't find the information they need in order to make decisions, and well-rounded ones at that. So not to reiterate what Councillor Mabee has said, but I think that we've laid the foundation over the last 3 years to actually execute said plan. So, and I will stand behind that. And I look forward to seeing the final plan come forward. So thank you again, John, for your robust presentation. I know there's a lot of information, and also to thank every single person who responded to that survey, because yes, people, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if you look at it, it's actually double the average response rate on any survey is 2%, and we had over 4. So it's actually double. I think that's the statistic, if memory serves me right, from 20 years ago in marketing class. But I'll get it. No, I'm kidding. So our hope is that the final version comes forward, and we will be able to hit the ground running. So thank you again, John. Thank you for everything in your team, and we'll be seeing you back for the final version. Any further comments before we wrap that up? That's it. Thank you, John. Okay. Does anybody need a break now before we get into the main, or we're going to okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess, and we'll be back at just 1 minute. So 7:46. Okay, thanks, people. Okay, so we're back in session, 1 minute late. My apologies. So next on the agenda is staff reports and administration report SR-098-21, 2022 municipal election voting methods. Motion is put forward by Councillor Mabee and seconded by Councillor Foti. The committee of the whole recommends that council approve the use of paper with the use of optical vote count tabulators, internet and telephone voting methods for the 2022 municipal election. And that the committee of the whole recommends that council direct staff to release a joint RFP with other municipalities within the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville for the supply of internet and telephone voting system. Any discussion on this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Some of the things that I wrote down, and this is from the past couple elections, is that when we got to the actual polling station, the number of paper ballots that were actually available was very light, and in some cases not even available at that particular point of the day. And in one case, paper ballots showed up later on, which was kind of ironic, but I thought that these types of polling stations should have fully supplied and stocked by that point before it even opens. And I know that a lot of people still aren't comfortable with computer or call in or whatever. They like to go to the polling station and make their wishes known that way. So I would like to see that the paper ballots, I don't know what the count was last time at each station or what the potential was, but perhaps even double, because at the polling station when I got there, the lineup was long. Paper ballots were not really available, and the backup for using the computer was immense. So, let's try to eliminate it so that people can get there, get their vote done and get out and move on so that we do get the maximum number of votes. And in having said that, with the electronic voting and how, as much as we say computers are secure, we all can lend our memory back to some sort of fail on a computer security. So I'm always going to question how secure is the electronic voting. And I know that the companies will say, yes, we're 100%. Yeah, I just don't buy it. Sorry, I never have. I just can't, because how many people get hacked? How many businesses, how many big companies who have the dollars to actually put into this to make sure that there's no hacking, and they still get hacked? So it poses a big question in my mind, how secure are we? How valid are the votes that are being made actually are, to make sure that we are getting the right count? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Foti and then Councillor Olkey.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. With comments to add to what Councillor Mabee had said, I haven't been comfortable with the last two elections held in our municipality. The lineups are infuriating to some people. 2 elections ago, I was sitting in a polling station that ran out of paper ballots at 9:30 in the morning. To me, that's absolutely unacceptable. It's not that many people, I'm not looking to put blame anywhere on anyone, but it's unacceptable nonetheless. The polling stations open at 9, and by 9:30, they're out of paper ballots. Believe you me, they didn't put 1,000 people through that door in that 30-minute period. And, we read the numbers of how many people voted electronically. The reason they voted electronically, they had no choice. As Councillor Mabee alluded to, there was no paper ballots. I saw an elderly resident of this township who was likely she has voted in every election of any kind all her life. She very reluctantly was led with a family member to vote by a telephone, and she still didn't trust it. And I don't blame her for that. But I would like to see this election and this municipality turn around what has been a very negative trend of voting here for the last few years. And I will say this, to add to Councillor Mabee's comments, a very knowledgeable person in the election format stated to me just a few years ago, there is not one word in the criminal code reflecting the word electronic of anything. So it can't be trusted, quite frankly. If it isn't in the criminal code as a, you can't get away with this, believe me, somebody's going to try someday if they already haven't. And other municipalities, Napanee, our closest neighbor, just a few two elections ago, and they're sprinkled around throughout the province. There's a lot of distrust in this system, but our province and our local MPP need to step up and put some teeth into the laws of what stands behind our most sacred value as a democracy, and that's our voting right. And if they can't look after the legalities of it, something is really, really wrong. Thank you.
So just to synopsize so that I understand, so that if I'm having this conversation with our MPP in regards to electronic voting, your concern is that currently under the Municipal Act and the Elections Act, which is actually federal jurisdiction, not provincial, it does not speak to electronic voting in that. Is that correct?
That is true.
No.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'll let the clerk speak. Madam Clerk, you said that they've changed something.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. It does speak to it. I think what you're alluding to is the criminal code and the ramifications of tampering with
So has
electronic
that
voting.
changed?
But the Municipal Elections Act does provide for alternative voting methods, which is electronic, so internet and telephone voting. So it is legal to dispense that voting method in election. But I'd be interested if you could give me some feedback into exactly what portion of the criminal code and what section it is that alludes to that, so that I can do my research for you, for council.
If I told you the heft of badge that the person that gave that information to me wore, it would ring loud. But I hope they have changed. I really hope they do. But if they haven't, and that was recent information, as in the last 4 years.
So the Municipal Act does speak to it, but you're talking about the criminal code, so that if somebody was to tamper with
That's right.
any sort of voting methods, that there is no way to enforce.
Well,
type
we,
thing.
we all know these calls that come from all over the globes to our telephones every day. What are they going to come into next? Our electoral system? You know, we saw our neighbors to the south and some of the nonsense they had to listen to about tampering. Well, I don't think we're immune to having any tampering done up here, but I'd like to think we'd have the law stand behind it.
Mhm.
And unless it's changed in the last few years, and I hope it has, I would like somebody to pass that on, your worship, through the MPP or MP, is to
MP.
make sure it does exist.
So I'm going to recognize the CAO, then Councillor Jameson, and then Councillor Olkey, and then Councillor Grau. Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, the criminal code has provisions about interception of electronic communications. It carries a 5-year penalty under the criminal code, right? So if someone was hacking into a system like that, that's probably where they would start on the charges, and then it would probably fan out from there for fraud, conspiracy. Heaven knows, there's a lot of things that they can do. They prosecute hackers all the time. And so if someone was compromising the integrity of a voting system, it's the same thing as if they're hacking a big corporation or a small corporation or a township. So there are penalties under the criminal code.
I don't want to get down the rabbit hole. I know that there's specific things, and I think that this is a conversation that Councillor Fody, I think you should have with the CAO specifically about your concerns. Not to say that they aren't valid, but we'll end up going down further in a rabbit hole. So Councillor Jameson, then Councillor Olkey, and then Councillor.
I'd like to see us move ahead with the electronic voting, and I appreciate Councillor Fody's comments because it can be frustrating. And last couple of weeks, Canadians seem to be expressing that they're not really interested in having elections anyway, but apparently we have to nonetheless. But I would like to see the electronic voting, and specific to us, I'd like to see it because we have a lot of non-residents that at the point of which there is an election, they're not here. And so we have to balance the security with the need to engage as many people as possible in the process. So I'm sure that, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I hope we can be given a level of comfort with the challenges that the councillor raises, but I'd certainly like to move ahead and have as many tools at our disposal to let people vote safely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I agree with both my councillor colleagues. Quite a number of my constituents are elderly. Even in the village of Sealy's Bay, it is a challenge for some of them to get across to vote. And I think everyone knows that means I'm speaking with the retirement residents there. And down places like Up the Grove Road, they really don't have internet that you could call it that. And the phone lines, for some of the elderly people there, the phone lines are intermittent too. So I think there needs to be the options, the traditional options we've had, and to try to ensure that the polling stations we do put up have the requisite numbers of ballots. And historically, we should be able to predict that pretty well.
I
Thank you.
think without speaking on behalf of the clerk and the conversations that I've had with her in the past, but I know that is already taken into consideration, that there will be a very much an increased number of paper ballots for the next election, that won't be, hopefully will not be an issue because of the lesson learned. I'll have the clerk. Did you want to say?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. That's the intention really of bringing this report this early, is to provide or to gather feedback rather from you and from the citizens, whoever, wishes to give me some feedback. It's appreciated because it'll aid me in my research, and it'll avoid last minute changes that happened in the last election. There were, I believe, 3 paper ballot voting locations that were added on 4 months before the election. So that's really what I'm trying to avoid, is any last minute changes and putting forward a plan that doesn't align with council. So I do intend to bring a polling location report in October. And that's really the meat and potatoes, I think, of what you guys are getting into right now. But right now, I need, the intention of this report is to nail down a voting method, so that I can bring the second phase of planning, which is polling locations, equipment, resources, both staff and otherwise. So if you want to email me individually, don't do it in a quorum email. Or if citizens want to email me or call me, any feedback is encouraged. And the clerk's procedures aren't due until June of the year of the election now, where previously they were due December at the end of the year previous to the election year. So we do have some leeway on building that. So that's why this is before you relatively early in September. Normally it wouldn't come until later. So
I'm going to recognize Councillor Burrell and then go from there. Go ahead.
And thank you through you, Your Worship. And following up on the clerk's summation of the last election, it is unfathomable in my mind that we would not have some polling stations open. We have limited access to internet in this township. We know it. We know that lots of folks were confused on the telephone because we also had that issue that people have forgotten about, which was the amalgamation of wards. I got more phone calls on that. What does it mean? Where's that going? So that confused it. So I don't understand how we could possibly think that we're ready for purely electronic voting. Now, speaking of Ward 3 down toward the water, everything went smooth as silk down there. Frankly, in and out, easy peasy.
You must have had all the ballots.
I had all the ballots. No, I was just throwing them out. No. So anyway, my 2 bits, I back up what the clerk has said. Those were extremely interesting issues. It became a little embattled, as I recall, as to not having paper ballots. People were going to go in this. We're just not ready for that here. We have to have paper and we have to have phone and we need internet or whatever app-based voting. Thank you.
thanks. Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, that is staff's recommendation to maintain paper ballots. I agree. I don't think we're ready for strictly electronic. While smaller municipalities maybe, I think with our broadband challenges, sorry to touch on it again. I don't think we're ready for a strictly e-voting.
One last issue or one last point I want to make. This report states they make it sound like ISI was rather a small deal. They represented over 102 municipalities in the province of Ontario out of what, 444? They were well over 100. Thank you.
Councillor Olkey, I'll let you have the last word and then.
The
oh,
last
sorry.
word, your worship, is that I think it's all been covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mabee?
Just one last point, Madam Mayor, both federal and provincial only do paper ballots.
Fair enough. I don't have I don't have a retort to that, so I'll leave it be. So as the clerk discussed in her comments, this is to help her create the plan overall for all voting methods, as one voting method is not being chosen at this point in time. But that the motion that's on the floor right now, put forward by Councillor Mabee and seconded by Councillor Fody, is to allow the clerk to start her proceedings to bring a report to council about the plan on how we're going to run this out. So all those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, and the next motion that's on the floor is Community and Business Service Report SR-099-21 Contribution Agreement for Municipal Modernization Program. Motion is moved by Councillor Mabee and seconded by Councillor Fody that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorize the Mayor and Clerk to enter into an agreement with the Province of Ontario as represented by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing as it relates to the Municipal Modernization Program. I think this is fairly self-explanatory. Any further questions in regards to that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Next is Community and Business Service Report SR-100-21 Enabling Accessibility Fund. Oh, yeah, no, that's right. Sorry, I thought I got my head myself. Motion is by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Committee of the Whole recommends the Council direct staff to proceed with securing funding under the Enabling Accessibility Fund, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the matching funds up to $65,000 from the Facilities Reserve Fund as approved in the 2021 capital budget for municipal building work, bracket 905-9007 bracket. Any comments, questions, or queries in regards to the report attached to this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
At our last council meeting, I indicated that I understood that $100,000 ICIP grant went toward our playground up in Centennial Park. And I was led to believe that the rest of that $100,000 was to go to accessibility on trails or something. And it was told to me at that time that something would come back at this report. So did we indeed get $100,000 grant? Did we spend $75,000 or $65,000? And is there therefore $35,000 remaining in some reserve fund that could be put toward this? Second comment, the $200,000 that was sitting in the capital reserves that was put off due to the COVID, it was unclear to me exactly what was wrong with this building, this money pit that we live in. And here we are already taking the money out of it. It was unclear to me what the $200,000 was going for in this building. Was it safety? Was it good looks? Was it a sinking feeling that we're in a mud hole here? It was never clear to me what an additional 200,000 to the 100 and some thousand that's already been spent here. So getting to the concept of disabilities and accessibility, I'm a huge proponent of that. I spent a good part of my life dealing with it in the city of Toronto. And it's just, I'm a little fuzzy on the funding. Again, getting back to that $35,000 that potentially is or isn't. And here we are taking 65 grand from a deferred $200,000 in this building that we're in.
Okay.
Could we get clarification on that? Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll go to Director Goodman in regards to the play structure and that grant opportunity and where those funds go, get spent, the whole bit. So go with that, and then we'll go with Director Holiday.
It's on. Okay, thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Actually, there's a couple of different grant programs that are in play here, Councillor. The one that I was hoping to have in front of you, there's one that I don't have the contribution agreement today. That's the ICIP COVID fund in the amount of the $100,000. We have it It's just we haven't received the paperwork from the government as I had expected, which is why I indicated that at the August meeting of council. It is forthcoming and that work will be proceeding. That tender was approved at the special meeting in August. This, pardon me.
I need you to use your microphone. Sorry.
And what was that grant for?
Thank you. That was for the climber, the play structure at Centennial Park. So that was in lieu of the $75,000 that we had originally included in the capital budget. Therefore, those funds will not be drawn from the reserve. The $100,000 that's before you this evening was actually an application that we submitted last year ahead of budget. The $100,000 request was to make accessible improvements within this office or the whole municipal building as a whole. So one of the things that as we look at different accessibility documents, if, for example, we had a staff person who had a mobility issue, I believe that they would have a real challenge coming in the back staff entrance, getting into the staff side, and every staff and counselor knows that our doors are awfully heavy. Really, the grant, the $100,000, would allow us to put electronic door openers on absolutely every single door in this office and make accessible improvements to the 4 washrooms, the 2 staff and the 2 public. Because we had tried to time the initial grant so that we would be able to budget the matching funds as part of the 2021 budget process, unfortunately, we were notified last year that we were unsuccessful with our application to enabling access. It was in August of this calendar year, so just a month and a half ago, that I received email notification that the federal government had made more funds available. So this $100,000 opened back up. Originally, for this calendar year, we had budgeted $200,000, and I believe that was largely to address air balancing in this building and remedial work to the beams.
So I'll actually ask Director Halliday to come forward about the building specific.
Thank you, through your worship. So the current status of that $200,000, we have engaged a consulting firm which came through council to review the beams within the building, have a look at the structure. We do have some beams that are cupping. We have some that are twisting. We don't know why. Initial reviews were that they didn't see stamps on some of the beams, and it was something that came through council and you guys approved. We engaged JL Richards to complete that work for us. So they have come and done their on-site assessment for us, and we're just waiting for the report at this time. As a result of that, we know that we will not be spending the $200,000 in 21. So it made sense for us to reallocate that money until we know further what we'll be investing in this facility to move forward.
Okay.
And just a quick question for Kim. Kim, that money that the government loosened up in August, was that specifically for accessibility?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So does that answer your questions, Councillor Guerrero? Close enough. Okay. Any further questions in regards to the motion that's at hand in regards to the matching funds up to 65,000? Oh, there is a follow-up. Go ahead, Councillor Guerrero.
I'm sorry, the old up to 65,000. Are we therefore going to have RFPs, P's and Q's on that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Yes, following full procurement policy, all the work would be tendered. When we built the grant application, we included a 20% contingency, which gets us up to that total of 165. Therefore, we anticipate, based on the quotes that we did when we wrote the grant, that we should be coming in lower, but of course, that's setting the maximum threshold, certainly, to do the work.
Fair enough. So the other thing you have to remember is that this building has seen a huge amount of overhaul, even in the 8 years that it's been erected, to maintain. But the good news is that I know that Director Halliday and some of his staff have even found some simple fixes that have saved a lot of money, and there's no more rain coming in this building, just from some basic sealing of wood. Something very simple, but very effective, and has made a huge difference. So the hope is that we don't continue to find bigger issues. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, and thank you for your indulgence on this one last question. Are we under any legal obligation to do this work, or is it a feel-good situation here for a correct decision? Thank you.
Are you talking about the accessibility or the maintenance of the building? I'm accessibility. Go ahead.
Accessibility. When the building was built, it was built to meet AOTA requirements for that time. I don't believe, and I can absolutely confirm, I will double check just so I can confirm for my own peace of mind on top of this. We don't have an obligation to do this work unless we were to undergo major renovations at this building, in which case it would trigger the necessity to do the work. At this point, it was sort of an opportunity. And we had just had a young lady who was here for, I believe it was a 6-week co-op placement. She wasn't in a wheelchair, but she did have some mobility issues, and it really kind of brought it to the forefront of staff's mind.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've had our questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Just on a quick note from the other end of this whole thing, I am under AODA must change. There is no option. Things have to be upgraded to make sure that and I'm a provincial site, so it has to happen. So we might as well, if we get the money, let's do it and make sure it's compliant, because later on it could be something different again.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Next motion that's coming forward is in regards to Community Business Services Report SR-101-21 National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Motion is made by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jameson. Whereas the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its final report on June the 2nd, 2015, which included 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. And whereas the recent discoveries of remains and unmarked graves across Canada has led to increased calls for all levels of government to address the recommendations in the TRC's calls to action. And whereas all Canadians and all orders of government have a role to play in reconciliation. And whereas recommendation number 80 in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called upon the federal government in collaboration with our Aboriginal peoples to establish a national day for truth and reconciliation to ensure that public commemoration of history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. And whereas the federal government has announced September 30th, 2021, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, National Orange Shirt Day. Therefore, be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends that the Council of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands commits to recognizing September 30th, 2021 as National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, National Orange Shirt Day, by sharing the stories of residential school survivors, their families, and their communities. Are there any discussions on this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, and through you. Again, with this, I guess I have a couple of questions. One, we know that the federal government has made the 30th a mandatory date. The province has not yet. And again, that's another big question on maybe why that hasn't happened. But certainly in our area, are we looking to put up any plaques or signage indicating what Indigenous people we had in our area and maybe where, to give them the recognition that that they were on the lands at an earlier time? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Community and Business Services Director to speak to any of the questions that Councillor Mabee had regarding plaques or commemoration of sites throughout the municipality.
Certainly, and through you, your worship. Thank you, Councillor Mabee. The CAO and I have had several conversations really broadly about truth and reconciliation. And it is a very sensitive subject. And I want to assure council that we are looking at options and opportunities to recognize and celebrate the Indigenous culture of this area. But we want to do it right. This is not an opportunity to rush through and make bold statements in haste, but we want to make sure that we're consulting with our Indigenous communities, and that takes time. We're cognizant that we are on the lands of the Akwesasne and Haudenosaunee. These are conversations that I've had with other government and government agencies that are operating with the area. And so we're in the process of trying to develop a robust list of all of the nations that once occupied this space so that we can truly do proper consultation to make sure that when we build or develop a land acknowledgement statement, for example, that we haven't forgotten any one particular nation as part of that process. At the same time, as part of the community and safety well-being plan, one of the topics that was discussed in there, of course, is diversity and inclusion, and making sure that people who may look a little different, may act a little different, come from a different culture, feel warm and welcome in our communities. And there are several ways that we can do that by being open, welcoming, displaying flags, et cetera, et cetera. So short of drawing this out into a 30-minute presentation, because it's something I grew up in Northern Ontario. We had First Nations communities and Indigenous culture surrounding us. It was in my high school every day. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. So we are certainly looking for opportunities to fly the appropriate flag where appropriate, develop a comprehensive land acknowledgement statement, look at opportunities for programming such as blanket programming. Really, the goal is to recognize the culture and celebrate them at the same time. So I hope that that sort of is the roundabout way of getting there, but we are certainly taking strides to make sure that proper acknowledgement is taken.
Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Grell, sorry about that.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. When I read the resolution, it says we recognize Flag Day. And then it goes on to say, by sharing the stories of residential school survivors, their families, and communities. I would actually, at this time, move to strike that from that resolution, because I would be interested in exactly who is providing that, what is being provided, and who approves it. In other words, are we going to have every municipality in the province with their own version? Are we going to be bringing that to our children in camps? Something that, good Lord, we have enough trouble getting the arithmetic problem solved at the provincial level. So to me, without being harsh, I think that should be taken out for now. And perhaps when we have a better idea precisely what we would like to share, reintroduce it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And therefore, I would put a motion to amend.
So
and,
to have it end right under National
correct,
Church Day.
at this time. And perhaps we could add future considerations. But at this time, I think that at the risk of getting hate mail, take that out. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Grell has proposed an amendment to have that, the last half of the last sentence of the resolution be taken out. The amendment would strike by sharing the stories of residential school survivors, their families and communities, based on the fact that that we need to ensure that they are the correct stories, that they are vetted, that they are it's not conjecture one way or the other on either side. So that we're not just pulling up.
Would anybody like to second?
Yes,
that?
I need a seconder for that, please. Councillor Fody. So there's a seconder on the amendment. So we'll discuss the amendment. So are there any councillors looking for clarification on why Councillor Grell and Councillor Fody are looking to support this amendment? Or is it clear as to why it's there or why it's being asked to be removed? Okay, so it's clear for the amendment. I'll ask for a vote on the amendment. All those in favor of striking that phrase, please put your hand up. All those opposed? Okay. And
You gotta reread it without it.
oh,
Just print it
sorry,
here.
I'll reread it.
I printed all of them.
Hold on. Printed all of them.
There it is.
Thank you. So the motion, the amended motion reads as, whereas the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its final report on June the 2nd, 2015, which included 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. And whereas the recent discoveries of remains and unmarked graves across Canada has led to increased calls for all levels of government to address the recommendations in the TRC's call to action. And whereas all Canadians in all orders of government have a role to play in reconciliation. And whereas recommendation number 80 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called upon the federal government in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples to establish a national day for truth and reconciliation to ensure the public commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. And whereas the national federal government has announced September 30th, 2021 as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, National Orange Shirt Day. That's it.
The last
Now,
paragraph
therefore,
is-
be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands commits to recognizing September 30th, 2020 as National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, National Orange Shirt Day, period.
Okay.
Okay, so the mover, the original mover and seconder, and now that as the motion is amended, it was moved by Councillor Fody and seconded by Councillor Jameson. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor, and then I'll have Councillor Olkey speak.
Just wondering, will we be providing orange
Shirts for everyone?
TLTI shirts
I
for
think
staff?
I think that's a suggestion that can be taken upon. It doesn't need to be decision of council. That's a management decision, but a good one, a good suggestion, just the same. Thank you. Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. I admit I was a bit slow on my button there, but it seems to me that those stories would be provided to us. We won't invent them here.
No, sorry, I think I
So
misspoke
that's why I
earlier.
voted against the amendment.
Right. I think that it's more about providing something balanced and comprehensive that can be shared and is recognized throughout the province as the stories of the peoples affected by these atrocities over the years.
May I go on?
Go ahead.
I've had some experience with this. I was involved in the Oka crisis. I was one of the two veterans that stood on the monument at McDonald in Kingston. I've lived amongst Indigenous people. And I really have a lot of sympathy for these stories. I tried to delve into what the engagement was here. And quite frankly, I found out, and I'll give them the footnote, Keith Sly, Heritage, told me there are Indigenous sites here, but pretty much they were destroyed by the water conservation projects. There were hunting and fishing camps along the waterways. There was an equivalent to the head smashed in buffalo jump where the locals drove white-tailed deer as part of their sustenance, but this has all been lost. I think we should be prepared to accept the stories that come to us. Another bit of angst for me was I was a member of a church. I was a warden of a specific church when that church had to make cash restitutions. And every month or every week, practically, I had to explain to people why we had to raise these monies. And my response was we were part of a corporate body that had done ill to these people, and we had to make restitution to remain part of that corporate body. Some people accepted it. Most people accepted it. Some people did not. I regret that we've amended the motion. I will support the motion going forward, but I must say that I regret that we amended it. Thank you.
Well, I think I think that
I believe we should go with what was originally sent because that's the highest level of consensuality there is on it at this point.
I think the other thing, the amended motion doesn't preclude us from sharing stories or whatever. I think it doesn't obligate us to find those stories, that that information will come forward and will be part of I'm sure of a very robust federal and provincial education project, because this will live on long after us. So with that, I'll call the question as it is amended, as I've read it already. All those in favor of the amended motion, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Okay. Next motion is moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Foti, that the committee of the whole recommend that council approve bylaw 21-045 to update the reserve and the reserve fund policy, and that the committee of the whole recommend that council approve the methodology for the redistribution of the capital reserve fund balances. Discussion on this motion. We do have the treasurer with us this evening, so if anybody's any specific questions, go ahead, Councillor Grow.
My favorite topics. As I read this, one thing that stood out in my mind is that we're getting ahead of our skis here, because we haven't in any way discussed the upcoming. We haven't been presented with an asset management plan. We know it's coming and we know it's the way to go. We haven't even begun a budgetary process, and yet I see that we have, and I know it says it's open to change, so I'm going to say let's not make those changes quite yet, because the numbers are, we are taking money from many reserve funds, reducing them significantly, and we're putting $4 million into roads and storm sewers. So this doesn't really help me as a councillor understand the greater transparency, et cetera. I see we could do things like keep the capital infrastructure reserve fund in name and then say to include, 701-2, 703-4, whatever, because we are splitting this, and it's an arbitrary split. And again, I do know that we can change this, these percentages as an example. I didn't find that it provided clarity to me tonight. Perhaps when I see more data from the asset management plan, when I see that we start into the budgeting, because the way I read this, again, we've taken away money from reserve funds that we had with good intention. They were sitting there. So before, again, I could vote this, I would like to see where all that money was drawn from. And I could refer back to the reapportionment of $2.4 million tax stability fund some years ago. And it went into a number of things, all probably good, but it was still a significant leap ahead of the skis. So I hope I'm expressing that right. I just did not feel that this provided me with enough information, which would, the information I'd like to see would be a spreadsheet, if you will, on where are all our current reserves and where that money is being drawn from, because if I read this correctly, we are pretty much gutting a few. And my last point is, we changed a few people in my region of the township understand that the casino used to fund in certain percentages, the 68.5, the 3.5, the 28.5, various chunks went into, they still think that probably. So we eliminated that. We eliminated the community grant program, I thought. So I would like to, so when we fund this, are we funding it on these percentages? Like when we start talking about operational monies going over into these funds, are we going to go through each one? Are we going to, is it going to be through the capital projects? Because what it seems it's setting us up for is road network. And it's got such an emphasis at $4 million there that I am not ready to pass this. I would perhaps with more information and in the not too distant future, but I would still like to see a little more asset management detail, granular, I think it's a popular word these days in politics. And I'd like to perhaps see where this is taking us in the budgeting process. I believe that this was put together to help us, but I don't feel it and I don't see it, frankly. Thank you.
Go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship. So the community grants program wasn't eliminated, like it was not included in last year's budget because we didn't have money to support it, but that reserve fund still exists. It has not been removed from the reserve fund policy. It still exists in the policy unless council wishes to completely remove that program for the term of council, I guess, until another council would decide what to do. The reserve fund policy was brought forward to align with the asset management plan, which will be coming in October to committee of the whole. The capital asset reserves that are currently set up in the policy or were currently set up in the policy are in a table in your report. And then the proposed reserve funds are in that table as well. They aren't one-to-one relationship. What it's trying to do is take the amount of money that's sitting in those capital reserves right now and allocate them to the new reserves, which match what the asset profiles are in our asset management plan. So for example, right now we have a fire services reserve. In our asset management plan, we don't have an asset class for fire. We have fire vehicles and fleet. We have fire equipment and machinery and equipment. We have fire facilities in the fire halls. So the attempt in the change to the policy was just to try to line up. So we have a reserve fund that matches an asset class. And then when we're looking at the asset management plan, we can see the infrastructure deficit for that asset class could be $1 million. And then we would know how to match that up cleanly in the budget to say, what's the discrepancy? What's council familiar with, like feeling comfortable with increasing those contributions? It's just to try to align. It's not to change anything that council has already approved in terms of budget. So we're still making the same contributions to the capital reserves this year. Every month we book an entry based on the 2021 budget. That same money will go. Council will still provide direction through the 2022 budget process as to how much you would like to transfer to reserves. I will come forward with a budget to try to put as much as we can in without negatively affecting the tax rate too terribly. But it's all still based on the same principles. It's just to try to align those reserve funds with how the asset management plan set up.
Okay, so I'll have a follow-up for Councillor Garella and then I'll recognize Councillor Wilkie. Go ahead.
Once again, my concern, we need to get into this a little deeper here than pass this evening. As an example, this is from our 2001 deliberations. The fire services, and again, don't hold these numbers may not be exactly correct. This was the projected balances. So there's over 300,000 in fire services, and in the equipment reserve, there's over 465,000. In fact, 466,000. That would be $700,000. And yet, when I look in the fleet, machinery, and equipment, all of a sudden we're down to 325,000 in this new document. So you can see that my concern is that we're pulling money without really understanding that. I don't see any heads nodding around this table going, yeah, I got it. I think I would need to see the flow from current to this. I don't know how else to explain it. Thank you. It seems to be a big leap for tonight. Thank you.
I'll let the treasurer respond and then I'll go to Councillor Wilkie.
So the whole premise on the percentages in the report, the way those numbers are then allocated to the new set of reserve funds is based on the asset management value and the asset management plan. If council is not comfortable, that's fine. I bring the policy forward when I have time. Once I'm into budget year end, it's hard for me to bring you back policies because I get extremely busy with those. But if you're not comfortable, it's not going to, be the end of the world or anything. It's fine, whatever council wishes to do. But those percentages are based on the fact that our road network, I think, is $143 million out of the total asset management, which I think I forget off the top of my head. But anyway, like that is the biggest majority of the road network represents the biggest majority of our assets. So that's why most of the money goes to that reserve fund. And we likely will still have an infrastructure deficit within each reserve fund, but
I'm going to recognize Councillor Wilkie.
Thank you, Worship, and through you, just a general observation than a specific technical question. In Ward 1, most of the questions that we receive are about roads, bridges, culverts, and drains. And the bulk of the road network in this township is in that ward. And the balance looks about right to me in terms of allocations. The next question I have is purely technical, I think. I notice on page 1 of your revised, reserve is an allocation of net surpluses representing accumulated net revenue. Reserves do not receive an annual interest allocation. Because I have old farmer background, I'm wondering what happens to the proceeds of money that's sitting there. If it's $5.7 million at 2% interest, that's $114,000. I presume we have this money sitting in things like GICs. And what happens to that interest?
Through you,
Go
Worship.
ahead.
So I think, and I have a different screen up here now. Sorry, it's hard with multiple things open here, but I think that the definition is trying to illustrate that a reserve doesn't accrue interest, but the reserve funds do. So the reserve funds should be and do receive an interest allocation from to each reserve fund through the year. And that's what I think that was trying to illustrate or correct in the policy. I'm not sure if you're reading from the.
Does that happen?
Perhaps another short sentence, just explaining what you said would stop someone like me from.
That interest allocation, sorry to jump in, but that interest allocation, does that happen at the audit time, or does that happen on a monthly basis, like the allocation that you were talking about?
So I'm trying to get that process in place because historically we have not done that here, but we will be doing it for this year end audit. It will be done by year end and then hopefully in place quarterly going forward or monthly.
So
depending.
quarterly allocation going forward. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I have Councillor Mabee, Councillor Fody, and Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I have a couple questions here. Well, a few maybe. Water and wastewater, that was already split before, and it came back to this report, looked like it hadn't been split, but I know in the spring we'd already talked about that when and the reserves were already split back in June, were they not?
I'll let her respond to the questions as they come.
Sorry, just to clarify, council approved the split of those reserve funds, but this was updating the actual policy to say now that there are two and to actually show the two balances because previously we hadn't
done that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Go ahead.
Next one was gas tax renamed. What was it used for before, and does it actually align with the new name, Canada Community Building Fund? I guess it is. I think that's the name of it.
Go ahead.
Through your worship. The federal gas tax, I believe, is used mainly, we've used it mainly for roads and bridges, although I think they are expanding some of the eligibility within the program. And so in terms of how the name fits the actual different things we're using it for, I'm not sure really why it was changed, but it was a government mandated change. So that's why we had to update that in the policy.
But still going to be used for roads, mainly
Roads,
for our
bridge.
purposes?
That's historically what we've generally used it as roads and bridges.
Okay, thank you. The names of some of the funds here, the one that really struck me was, again, alluded to by Councillor Grell, I believe, is the Fire Services Reserve Fund, and then it's been changed to Fleet Machinery and Equipment Reserve Fund. My only big question there is that the fire services vehicles are the only ones that actually are time sensitive, with 20 years lifespan.
Sorry, through your worship, to clarify, those aren't one-to-one relationships. So there was a fire reserve fund. Now the fire capital assets, whether it's fleet, would come from the fleet. If it's a facility, it would come from the facility reserve. If it's not a one-to-one relationship in that table. Fire did not become fleet, if that's what's on the same line. It's
Yes,
we had this group of reserve funds. Now we're proposing to have this group of reserve funds. So if it's a fire truck, it would come from fleet. If it's an operations truck, it would come from the fleet reserve fund. It doesn't matter what department, it's based on the asset class.
So buildings are in with buildings.
Yeah,
All the buildings
Vehicles.
are together, no matter whether it's a fire station, the municipal building, a garage. They're all funded through the facility reserve fund.
I stand corrected. If in the past, the Fire Services Reserve Fund only paid for fire vehicles.
They paid for the facilities as well. Anything to do with fire.
Yeah, fire. But in this lump sum, that one reserve has everything in it. And again, as Councillor Grell alluded to, was that the values don't quite coincide from what we're maybe seeing here. So maybe some clarification would clear up that one, and I'd be good at that. So.
Okay, through your worship, sorry, and maybe I'm not explaining it well. So The proposed values in the new reserve funds are based on what the assets are worth. So the road network is based on the fact that if we were to have to replace all our roads, that percentage represents the percentage of our total assets. So fire services now, the assets are either funded through the fleet reserve. If it's fleet asset, if it's a facility, it's funded from the facility reserve. If it's bunker gear, it's funded through machinery and equipment.
I'm not sure whether I'm still clear, but we'll leave it. We'll leave it. Thanks.
I think it'll take us a while to get back to down the rabbit hole with this asset management because it is a different way of thinking than what we're used to. So Councillor Fody and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. I kind of agree originally with Councillor Gorell. I read this 4 times and I wasn't sure I was any better off the 4th time. But listening to your answers here tonight, so can I summarize this by saying what you're doing with the asset management plan and aligning these numbers? Is this how you would propose we set up a budget from here on in based on asset management as compared to how previous budgets were done for the fire, for maintenance? So we're going to have to realign our thinking toward budgets. Am I right?
Through your worship. Yes. So it's trying to align. So when we come forward with the budget this year, it's going to be based, the capital budget will come right out of our asset management data. So when we're coming forward with a capital budget to you this year, it's going to be based on the asset inventory that we've been working on compiling. And that asset inventory is set up in the categories that I'm trying to move the reserve funds to. So it's just, it's not the end of the world if we don't realign them. It's just, so if I look at the fire reserve fund and I try to do a financing model over the next 10, 20 years, and then I go look in the asset management plan and I say, what do we need for assets for the next 20 years? Well, then I've got to go into a whole bunch of different places to find fire because there's some fire assets in fleet, some fire assets in facilities, some fire assets in machinery and equipment, and then build that model to see, like, do we have enough money in the reserve fund or how much do we have to contribute? So instead of trying to kind of compare 2 different ways to set up, all I'm trying to do is say, okay, well, if we have the reserve fund set up in the same way the asset management plan is set up, and we know if I look at a 10-year plan for roads, and this is the road reserve fund, like I'm thinking for all of us, it would be easier to line, but it's not critical. If we don't do it, I can still do the analysis and compare, but we're basically going to be trying to compare our reserve funds to our capital asset plan to see, and not just for 1 year, like the whole idea of this is we can look 10, 20, 30 years and say, how much are we going to have to borrow? What do we need in reserve funds? So trying to make that as easy as we can to make sense.
So it's apples to apples instead of apples and oranges. Correct. Okay. So Councillor Fody, follow up and then to Councillor Jameson.
Just to follow up, I think your last comment was maybe the most accurate in the sense that we're now going to focus our budget based on all those assets, whether they be fleet or whether they be buildings, and think that way. We have to change or realign our thinking, I guess is a better way of wording it. I'll leave it at that. I can readjust even at my age. Thank you.
Councillor Jameson.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's like everybody's right. To the extent that this is a technical change. This is not a commitment to spend expenditures. So I know I asked the treasurer a couple questions offline, and it was made clear to me that these are technical adjustments we're making now so that when the asset management plan is presented to us, we have the mechanisms in place to be able to drop everything in the slot. And looking at some of the numbers, it made me think, man, we're going to be in for some really interesting surprises on what we thought something was worth or how much it needed to be fixed or how little it needed to be fixed. It may be a really rough October for us, but in the meantime, I understand from the conversation or from the exchange we had that getting some of these things in place now is just one less anchor holding our finance department back from getting us into the AMP and then the budgeting process and so on. I guess I too would have thought, well, okay, let's bring in the AMP and then make the adjustments. It's kind of a chicken and an egg kind of a situation, but here we are. And I certainly support what the idea of making these technical changes in such a way that when we start our serious deliberations about where the money is going to go, we've already got some of these technical things out of the way. Thank you.
I also just make a point that tonight's discussion is, we're at committee of the whole, obviously, so this isn't the decision making. The bylaw is passed at council. So I can appreciate this is where we're supposed to ask our questions, but the whole reason we have committee of the whole and council on separate dates is to give us a week to have that conversation with staff for further, need further clarification. I know that this whole asset management path that we've been on has been a definite shift, not only for staff, but for us and how we have looked at things. And because we were with a treasurer previous to our current treasurer who did things differently. And then I know there's been some cleanup and some changes and some realignment, not to mention all the time and the effort and the training that our staff has taken in regards to asset management. So I know that it's difficult because we've had to relearn every year, so to speak. So I understand the frustration Councillor Gorell has expressed in regards to the changing of reserve policy, maybe not policy, but structure. We've had that changed a number of times over the last 10 years, and even Councillor or Deputy Mayor Lackey he's got more changes under his belt than we do. So anyways, I might, in light of time frame, because we do still have more time here, I will ask for last comments or questions, and then I'll call the questions so that we can move on. And if council has further comments or concerns about what's coming forward and want to have further debate, we have the ability to have more discussion at the next meeting in regards to passing the bylaw or not. So are there any further questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And we're carried. And the next motion is moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jamie, that committee, Jamie. It's almost 9 o'clock apparently. No, just seconded by Councillor Jameson. I don't know what came over me. The committee of the whole recommends that council approve bylaw 21-046 to update the tangible capital asset policy. Madam Treasurer, do you want to speak to this before we take questions? It might preempt some of the questions and provide further clarification.
Through your worship. So again, some of the changes here are just trying to align some of the terminology, some of the way that we've set up our policies previously. Now that we've got the asset management plan in final draft and trying to get it finalized to bring to council, I'm trying to just clean up the policies to make sure that they do align with the AMP as we're putting it together, so that it makes it easier, since all the documents should really align to each other. So.
Fair enough. Any questions in regards to the tangible capital asset policy? I am struggling with words this evening. Go ahead, Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, Worship, through you. One of the things I found kind of strange was the furniture and fixtures being removed. The only reason I say that is that as a large asset that I'm always trying to get rid of, and tags and all the legalities that go along with that particular item can add up to quite a big item. When you start looking around any given office, there's a lot of stuff there that may need to be tracked properly. And I'm just wondering, is that going to be tracked in another way then if it's not on a particular list? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through your worship. So the furniture and fixtures are actually just now included under machinery and equipment. Historically in this township, there isn't a significant dollar value or volume of those assets right now, but it definitely is something as we look at more pooled assets and trying to track our inventory, whether it's computers, which historically weren't always capitalized either. Furniture and fixtures, there are certain other smaller dollar items that we may spend a lot of money and may want to track. They will be tracked through the asset management inventory system, so we can ensure replacement and life cycle costing.
Thank you. Any, Councillor Grell, go ahead.
Just a quick question, and thank you for your time. There's a pooled asset. If you had a bunch of bunker gear, would you be pooling, because it's a $5,000 threshold? So if you had a set of bunker gear and 5 sets of bunker gear, does that just become part of a larger pool of fire equipment, tanks, whatever? And is that a good way to account for it?
Through your worship. So there's kind of two different things too that we're looking at. So for financial reporting, yeah, the $5,000, the bunker gear is under that. So we wouldn't have to necessarily capitalize it, but because we probably want to track it, we want to know when it's going to come to its useful life. Then if we use the pooled assets, we can say, well, individually it's under 5,000, but as a pool, it is over 5,000. I'm not sure if it is off the top of my head, but it's just, for example, say if it's over 5,000, then we would actually maybe want to track every set of bunker gear in the asset inventory software. So we would know how many are coming due that I think they have a definite lifespan, and we could track better who has each set and which station they're at and so on. So it does just give us more tracking operationally to manage it. Financial reporting, we might not need to actually report it if it's under 5,000.
Any further questions in regards to this policy? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and we're carried. Last report of the evening is moved by Deputy Mayor Lackey, seconded by Councillor Oakley, that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorize staff to engage the public through an online survey to determine the level of support for initiatives identified by the Waste Management Working Group. Director Halliday, please come forward and give us a little synopsis here, please.
Just give me 1 second.
Go ahead.
Everybody can see that?
Yep, everybody can.
Okay,
Everybody can.
good. So I just wanted to start off tonight with an update of what we've been working on with the Waste Management Working Group. We've talked about the 4 main topics are organic waste, yard waste, recycling, and solid waste. So right now, the Waste Management Working Group is comprised of 3 councillors. Second. Councillor Fody, Councillor Jameson, and Councillor Mabee. We have 1 member of the public with Kathy DeCroon, and then we have our consultant, John Pike from Melrose, who's here on his own accord. We're not paying him to do this. There's also James Tuck, manager of IES, and myself. And we've been meeting since council had formed this group or suggested we form this group back in April. So we started out by looking at some of the past efforts, the current practices, and then our options for moving forward. So I'll start with organic waste. Organic waste is all fruits and veggies, meat, poultry, bones, dairy products, paper plates, tissues, everything that goes in the green bins at the waste site. That is our current practice. We have 24 of these bins at the site, and they have to be tipped every 2 weeks. And the annual cost for this program is somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. Alternatively, we've looked at alternative measures that we can do to be more efficient and be more effective. Those include household composters. I'll explain those in a second. Large organic bins at the waste site, and then a biodigester. So the household composters, this is something that we can implement fairly quickly. They're $50 to purchase them in bulk. I reached out to an adjacent municipality who does this practice currently. They buy them for it's $46.98 plus shipping, and they sell them for $50. So it ends up being net zero. And then they sell them to the public at their cost. The positives of this is that it reduces our operational costs at the waste disposal sites, and it also produces soil for gardens, et cetera, at people's individual properties. The negatives is that it does require maintenance to turn the material, to keep it working, become soil. It can attract rodents if you put the wrong materials like bones and meat and those types of things into them. And it is a direct cost, albeit not very much, but it is directly to the residents that purchase them. The second process we looked at, this would be on site at the waste disposal sites, is larger bins. Similar to what you see at restaurants where you can dump into a larger bin instead of the individual ones. The positives of that is that it would reduce the tipping events at each of the sites. And the negatives is that our current supplier does not provide this service. Longer term, we had discussed organic biodigester. There is one in the municipality. It's privately owned. And from what I've been told, it's close to capacity, but it is a process that is proven to be effective. And the resultant material from this, or the product from this is electricity. So it will generate electricity from the organic waste. The positives of this is that it converts the organics to electricity, obviously. Capacity to process all organics without shipping it out, so it would remain on site. And the negatives is that it is an expensive process, about $1.5 million plus to build one of these, and it does require a large amount of space. Second topic that we discussed was yard waste. So yard waste is all the leaves and branches. We currently receive these at all of our waste disposal sites. And we had come from a process of burning at the waste disposal sites to now shipping them to one location and grinding them. We're grinding them 2 to 3 times per year, and the annual cost for this program is $25,000 to $30,000. Some alternatives. What can we do? Really, there was one alternative that we had discussed. It's relocating from our waste disposal sites to some central location. Initially, we discussed relocating it to the Lansdowne site and closing the other waste sites off to this process. But in conversation with John Pike from Melrose, he said that if we take it to this yard waste to a waste site, it is considered waste and it goes against our capacity. So if we relocate it to a central location, I see somewhere like here in the yard, if we have the space for it, where it's no longer located on a waste disposal site, and it could be available to the public as well as ourselves. We would still have to grind this up. We'd have to process this material, but at least we would increase our available capacity at our waste disposal sites as a result of this, and be able to share this with the public instead of having to process it all ourselves. I'll talk about it again. So centralization away from the waste sites. The positive, it's not considered waste. It's available to the public and to the municipality. Reduce our operational costs because we wouldn't be receiving it at our 3 waste disposal sites and then relocating it to a central spot. It would be there already. And it obviously increases our operational capacity, being our staff time, because currently it's about 2 to 3 days per month us hauling the material to a different site now that we're no longer burning it on site. And the negative of this would be that it would be additional resources to manage a new site. Recycling. Recycling includes tires, e-waste, hazardous waste, batteries, and blue box recycling. So the current practice, bins for plastic and cans and paper products separately at the waste disposal site, and we have collection within Lansdowne alone. Our annual cost for this program is $115,000 to $120,000. This is over a couple of years. 70% of that is funded by Stewardship Ontario. 20% of it is funded through material recovery, like the metals that we take in for credit. And then the remainder is funded through taxation. So there's been some updates on recycling. In 2018, the Made in Ontario Environment Plan was established. They transitioned to a new model where the producers are now responsible for accessible, convenient, and free collection of recyclables. And that includes all of those items discussed before. The dates for the transition: tires were December 31st of 2018. Batteries were July 1st of 2020. Electronic waste was January 1st of this year. Hazardous waste is upcoming at October 1st, 2021. And then blue box recycling, July 1st, 2025. So blue box recycling, that is the biggest one. Myself personally, I've read through this, the regulation several times, and I'm unable to establish whether they will take over the physical process or whether it will be funding. What I've seen with the other applications, that it is more of a funding type thing, and they give money for these, and it's up to us to manage. The tires being an example where we still receive our tires at our waste sites, but it's no longer a cost to the municipality to ship those out. So some alternatives that we've looked at, compaction of recycled materials. So this would be on site at our waste disposal site. We would place a bin on site, and then we would have one for each stream. So at each waste disposal site, you would see a bin for the metals and plastics, and then a separate one for paper. And the purpose of this is that it will compact our waste at about a 5-to-1 ratio. Currently, right now, we're doing approximately 25 trips per month at $275 per trip. So you work out the cost on that, it adds up fairly quickly. It will reduce our municipal costs. It will also reduce the theft and vandalism at our waste disposal sites, where we have people going into the sites after hours and picking the cans and all those types of things out. It would be in a controlled facility where it would be safe. The negatives of this is that it does require electrical setup. It runs on a 220 and 120. There is a rental fee for these. They're $250 a month per unit. So each site would be about $500 per month. Each site would be $750 per month. So that there would be that cost. The last topic that we discussed is it's the big one here, solid waste overview. So solid waste is the remainder of the material that is not yard waste, is not the brush, is not the recycling. It's what we're left with afterwards that has to go to the face of the waste site. So all remaining materials includes household waste, construction waste, boats, etc. And all of these add to our current capacity. So our current practice is that we're collecting this at all of our waste disposal sites, and our covering frequency for that is 2 to 3 times per month. Annual cost for this program is $950,000, and our compaction is completed by a dozer. So short-term solid waste alternatives, we looked at pre-compaction of solid waste. Similar to the recycling, we would put a bin on site for the solid waste. Instead of the open air bins that we're currently filling, it can increase the life expectancy of our waste disposal sites of up to 50% from what they are right now. The positive of that is that it will increase our compaction prior to placing on site, 5-to-1, similar to the recycling. It can be utilized as a waste transfer site moving forward if required. And then it reduces waste exposure to rodents and scavengers, which is MOE always says that that's an issue. We know that. The negatives of this is the electrical setup and operational costs and the rental, similar to the recycling. Medium term, greater than 2 years. It would take approximately 2 years to put something like this in place. Is municipal collection, providing collection services to all mainland residents, and collection bins on municipal right-of-ways for the private lanes. The majority of our private lanes in this municipality are not constructed for a large garbage truck to travel down the road. So we would have to have some means of providing garbage collection to them at the edge of the road. The positive of this is that it's a consistent approach to municipal wide. It reduces the need for 3 active waste disposal sites, where we could have one open for the residents that do not receive municipal collection, but the rest would be receiving their municipal collection. So there's no requirement for having them open at the same time. The negatives of this is that it is a costly program to run, approximately $200 per household per year. Now, I have to establish that cost is actually garbage and recycling, both streams at the same time. It's $100 estimated for garbage and $100 estimated for recycling per household per year. The initial fleet delays due to COVID, and if provided by municipal staff. So if we were to take this in, it's more cost effective for the municipality to take this program on ourselves and hire the staff to do this. but we would have to build our fleet around this. There is a cost associated with building our fleet and time to do that. Collection route development required to initiate. So that would be internal planning, how many houses can a garbage truck pick up in a day? How many houses can we pick up in a week? Those types of things. How many trucks will we need? So all of those details would have to be worked out. Longer term, we have looked at alternative. Sorry, I'm just trying to see what we're talking about. Alternative waste processing. So we looked at incinerators, we looked at gasification. The positives of this, it's a long-lasting approach to waste management, and it is proven to be effective. It transforms our waste into an alternative energy source like hydro or diesel or electricity as well. Existing sites can be used as feedstock. We received a presentation from a firm, and that was one of their things, is that they come in and they clean up the waste sites and use all of that material as feedstock to feed the plant. It does meet environmental regulations, so that there are some facilities already built in Ontario that are providing this service. And it eliminates the methane gas from the waste sites. The negatives is that it's expensive to build. They're $50 million up to $300 million. $50 million was a presentation that we received. We had to build our own MRF, material recycling facility, in order for them to be able to process that material. So there's that additional cost on top of $50 million. And then the $300 million was an example provided by the Durham York Energy Center. It takes about 10 years to build one, and they're too large for us to construct alone. There's not enough waste produced here. They're looking for approximately 100,000 tons of material per year, and we generate somewhere around 15. It's 10, 15, somewhere around there. We don't produce enough waste for us to sustain this type of process alone. So it would be a larger initiative, sort of countywide. Next steps, what we would like to accomplish. I'm sorry, this is it right away again. Would be a public survey. So there was a report provided to council outlining sort of what we would like to achieve from this, get some feedback if there is an appetite for these initiatives, whether it be smaller or big. Review the results from that public survey, present those findings to council, and then implementation if you see fit. And that is my presentation.
Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. When I first became a councillor, I attended various conferences, Roma and AMO, and they talked about the circular economy and how manufacturers would be required to produce packaging that could be immediately recycled. And at that time, they said, whatever you do, don't talk about incinerators. Now incinerators seem to be back on the table. And I'd heard that there were plans to make a regional one. Okay, we don't generate enough here, but perhaps we could subcontract to Ottawa or someplace like that and fill the capacity. Anything along those lines that you've heard, or anyone in that committee, I suppose?
Through you, Your Worship, I personally have not heard anything about a regional initiative to build an incinerator in Leeds and Grenville or anywhere near us. I know that there are firms that are interested in building here, but I've not heard anything from our end where we are actually looking to build.
I'll recognize Councillor Jameson.
Thank you. I have to say that sitting on this waste management advisory group has been enjoyable. It's hard to think that way about waste management, considering it's a crisis everywhere. But I really appreciate the efforts of our staff, particularly Director Holliday and Mr. Tuck, in enlightening us in all kinds of opportunities to look forward. I know you deal with the positives and the negatives in the report as he does, Your Worship. I think what we have to understand is that, or what I'm learning to understand is, when we look at this Waste Management Committee report that goes back to, and what's the date? 2009. Gentlemen Jarrett, Lawley, Smith, and Walker essentially made the same points in 2009. So that's a decade plus ago. Now we're in a position where we're learning, as Councillor Oki has suggested, we all shook at the idea of incinerators. Now we're talking about vaporizers. So, and the effluents are far different. We're in a different ballgame at a time when we're behind the 8 ball in terms of making this happen. So I appreciated that the director included that report, because it tells us that what was something we needed to think about doing then and didn't is now something we must have a plan to go forward. So make that point. The other thing that I want to say to the director, Your Worship, is that we have to learn how to not say cost and saving. I think what we need to do is talk about, we're going to invest here and divest there, in the sense that when we talk about something going to cost X number of millions of dollars, we're spending X number of millions of dollars with existing practices that are redundant. They've been redundant for some years, and now we have an opportunity to think in terms of, we're going to shift. And when we have a taxpayer saying keep taxes low, which is the number one thing, we need to divest ourselves of practices that don't work and invest in practices that will not only be consistent with what we can afford, but also save the, in our own way, save the planet. So I really appreciate what I've learned working with all these good people, and I look forward to us approving the next step, which is just the survey to help our residents understand we have a challenge and we have to address it now. Thank you, Your Worship.
I'll recognize Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Part of the conversation around this was also, when the sites close, we have a larger cost about trucking this wherever it's going to go. So when you look at the investment we might need to propose, we're just changing where it's going. Because if we're going to transport all this stuff to Ottawa or wherever, and our transportation guru can tell us that it's going to cost some dollars, for the amount that we have, there's still investment. No matter how you cut it, there's dollars to be spent on this waste management proposal. And we're just trying to find the best way of solving a long-term issue, that which, again, as Councillor Jameson alluded to, had been brought forward. And as Councillor Fody and I have said openly, it's a long-term plan that we need to get right and need to get a 40-year plan going. And so I think we're down the right road. We just got to make some more choices. And thank you, Director Holliday, for the presentation, and Mr. Tuff for all the work that you've done also in making compaction and making the sites a little bit more usable for a little longer. So we're going down the right path, and we have some good people on the committee with other ideas from the public. So we've had a very robust conversations during our meeting. So again, thank you very much.
Councillor.
Thank you. And I'd just like to agree with Councillor Mabee that a very informative report. And I've always had it in my own mind that it was inevitable that we're going to end up transferring waste eventually. So working backwards from that, we should be thinking about how to make that, with the inevitability of that, how we make that occur. And it would be a good line, in my opinion, to be a good way to think about it. If that's compaction, with our transit sites, et cetera, that would inform our thinking. I really did enjoy that. It was fairly concise. In terms of burning sites, I remember asking the Melrose fellas when they were in here about 2 years ago. I said, say, what about the burning of garbage? And they looked at each other and said, there's been one project, and that was Haldeman down that way, Durham.
Sure.
And they required, it was a $200 million project, they said. And at that time, they didn't have enough garbage to feed the monster. And I remember them, the second question I remember asking them was, has the Ontario government whatever, Ministry of Environment, whatever, have they approved any waste sites in the last while? And they looked at each other, I swear to God, and they said, not in 10, pardon me, no, they haven't. And it would take at least 10 years for that to occur. I remember that as clear as day, which again led to the inevitability that this township, when we run out of our spaces, we should be planning out for transferring somewhere. It's going somewhere. And whether it feeds a monster incinerator or whatever, compaction, whatever it takes, that seems to be, I guess, where I'm going with that. Short-term goals for the long-term inevitability. How's that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments before I call the question? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand for the survey to move forward? All those in favor? All those opposed? And the motion is carried. Thank you, Director Holliday.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask for this motion to come forward because we're already at 20 after 9 and we have to do our in-camera. So it'll just mean that it's off the table. So a motion is coming forward from Councillor Gorell and seconded by Councillor Olkey that as per section 5.01, the procedure bylaw, the committee of the whole meeting be extended by 1/2 hour, not to exceed 10 p.m. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? And we're carried. Okay, so next on the agenda is unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Seeing none, any other business? Go ahead, Councillor Mabee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of little things that are happening. This September 12th in Gananoque, there's a Pride Day. It's a Sunday. There's going to be a Pride Parade, and also down on the berm area or Joel Stone Park, there's a Pride display, an all-day event. And on September 19th, the Terry Fox Run for Thousand Islands will be happening. They're only having 100 people, but you can go online for a virtual type run and donation to the cause, which would be very helpful for the Terry Fox Run. And since so many people we know have had some sort of cancer, it's something we need to do. The only other thing I had down here, but I'm going to leave it. I'm going to talk to somebody else. So thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Gorell.
And thank you. And just quickly, I'd like to point out the Rockport Customs Park has installed a new sunshade. It looks quite lovely. And they also put in a floating accessible ramp from which you could launch a kayak, etc. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this time, but I would like to ask us to consider, we are going to be replacing the ramp at Rockport this month or two. And that circles back in my mind to the transportation study that we had done in Rockport. And there were some simple things brought out of that. And it would be prudent of us, if we're going to rebuild that ramp, and it's going to be spectacular, one of the easy peasy suggestions from the transportation study was reclaiming some of our parking for the township and aligning it for the boat ramp users. And so I know I could bring that up in the budget process, but I'd just like to plant the seed that now would be a good time to be considering those two jointly, some paint on the ground and maybe some traffic guidance. Thank you. And I will be bringing that up at budget for sure. And hopefully we can activate some of those plans that were on the shelf. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other business? Seeing none, I'll ask for any notices of motion. No notices of motion, so I'll go right into the mayor's update. So mayor's update, it will be brief this evening. I just want to say thank you to all the teachers, bus drivers, administrators, and the individuals who have got our children back to school as of today. I know that other than all the staff and many of the staff members have children that have returned to school. Some of you have grandchildren that have returned to school. I've never been so happy to see school buses on the road in my life. And mainly because I think that, our children definitely need to be back in that structured environment with the teachers that know how to teach them, not mortgage broker / mayor / mom who, is trying to do the best they can. And Lord knows every other parent that's tried their best through this. Moreover, I'm hopeful that they can stay where they're at, and that we can get through this year as best we can, but with the experts doing the teaching. And so the other reason I bring that up is in regards to school bus safety. Please be very mindful that school buses are out. I met my first one on the way here this evening, had to stop just after the police station on County Road 3. Stopped, no problems. There was a long lineup behind that bus, but they're worth it every time. So please be careful. Please keep your eyes open for children crossing the road and buses that will be operating on a Monday to Friday basis. Lastly, I just wanted to make some comments in regards to the broadband funding initiative, our initiative that we had so lovingly and diligently worked on for basically a year and a half. The frustration that I think we all feel, and I certainly, from a personal level, I know that we worked very hard to provide both funding for the studies that needed to happen in order to support that initiative, the work that the Broadband Advisory Committee provided, as well as the staff man hours. And I can't underestimate the man hours that staff put into making this happen. To say that I'm disappointed in the response that the provincial government gave us was to point fingers and blame, saying that we missed timeframes for submissions was 100% inaccurate, I should say. We have confirmation from both federal and provincial government that they were expecting our submission this fall, and that we had not missed any deadlines. So I take great offense to that, because not only does it make it look like we as council did not push, but it also assumes that our staff were not doing their job, which is 100% not the truth. And, under MFIMPA, I'm sure we could share those emails and happily do so. I won't share them to the general public, but they are in hand. So it has been made known. Those emails will be shared with the MPP and the Minister of Infrastructure. Whether it makes any difference or not will remain to be seen. But I do maintain that the plan that came forward through the tender process would have been best to serve the residents of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands, not the provincial plan that has been proposed. And I will leave it at that. So with that, we'll move into the in-camera session. As soon as we do that, gentlemen, I'll give you a quick break and then we'll reconvene. So moved by Councillor Lackey, seconded by Councillor Oakley, the committee of the whole adjourn to form an in-camera session to consider the personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal and local board employee, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality, labor relations or employee negotiations. All those in favor of the motion at hand? All those opposed? And we're carried. Thank you. To those watching, we'll be back out of in-camera probably closer to 10.